March 3rd, 2026. 2:14 a.m., a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Tempe, Arizona. The blinds are shut, taped at the corners against the streetlight outside, the kind of detail that only matters to someone who has decided weeks in advance that no one should be able to see what's on his monitors. 3 screens glow in the dark, the only light in the room besides the blue readout of a space heater running on its lowest setting because the rent here doesn't include utilities. And he's been careful with money for a long time. Right up until the next 11 seconds make that carefulness look almost funny in hindsight. His name, for the purposes of this file, is Ethan Cole, 22 years old. 2 semesters short of a computer science degree he walked away from without telling his parents for 4 months. No criminal record, no known accomplices, no venture funding, no hoodie-wearing team behind him, nothing that resembles the popular image of a criminal hacking operation. Just 1 laptop, 3 monitors, a half-finished energy drink going warm on the desk, and 11 months of reading open-source code that almost nobody else had bothered to read closely enough. The apartment itself tells you almost nothing about what's about to happen in it. A mattress on the floor instead of a frame, because a frame felt like a purchase he'd have to explain to someone. A whiteboard on the wall covered in diagrams that would mean nothing to anyone who walked in. Arrows connecting boxes labeled with names of trading pools and contract functions, the kind of handwriting that gets smaller and more cramped the longer someone has been staring at the same problem. He hasn't eaten a real meal since noon. He's rewritten the same 40 lines of code 11 times over the past 6 days, timing each version against a private test he built specifically so no one else would ever see it fail. Tonight is not a rehearsal. He knows that the way you know something is different in your body before you've said it out loud to yourself. At 2:14 a.m., he moves his cursor to a single button in a browser extension, rereads a line of code one more time out of habit rather than doubt, and clicks. 11 seconds later, a decentralized lending protocol holding just over $180 million in user deposits is empty. Before the story ends, you're going to see the exact kind of financial trick, used legally by traders every single day, that Ethan Cole twisted into a weapon. You're going to see the exact moment a protocol's own security team realized in real time that the money moving out of their reserve wasn't a glitch. You're going to see the message a blockchain forensics firm sent to federal investigators within the hour, and the one sentence in it that made everyone in that room go quiet. And you're going to see what Ethan Cole did with the money in the 72 hours afterward, because it is stranger and far more morally complicated than simply running. This isn't a story about a criminal mastermind. This is a story about a flaw sitting in plain sight, in code anyone could have read, that took one patient college dropout to actually notice. So how does one 22-year-old with no team and no funding walk away with the largest single-transaction crypto theft ever recorded? He doesn't hack a password. He doesn't breach a server. He borrows a fortune he never had to begin with, and gives it back before anyone can stop him. The scheme didn't begin at 2:14 a.m. It began 4 months earlier with something that looked, to anyone glancing at it, like a hobby. Ethan Cole had dropped out of Arizona State the previous spring, telling his parents he was taking a semester to focus on some projects, which was true in the way half-truths usually are. What he was actually doing was reading. Not forums, not tutorials. The actual open-source code of dozens of decentralized finance protocols. The kind of software that lets people borrow, lend, and trade cryptocurrency without a bank or broker anywhere in the chain. Most of that code is public by design, posted openly so anyone can audit it. And most people who read it are looking for one thing: bugs worth reporting for a reward. The industry's version of a locksmith pointing out an unlocked door for a modest thank you fee. Ethan Cole started out exactly that way. Over 4 months, he quietly reported 2 smaller bugs to 2 smaller protocols, collected a combined $11,000 in what the industry calls a bug bounty, and built, without anyone noticing, a reputation inside a handful of anonymous online forums as someone who read code more carefully than almost anyone posting there. Nobody who talked to him in those forums knew his real name. Nobody knew he was 22 or that he was 3 credits away from a degree he'd never finish, or that he was doing all of this from a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat while his parents believed he was building some projects. Then, in late January, reading through the code of a mid-sized lending protocol called for the purposes of this file, Solvex Finance, he found something different. Not a small bug, a door. He found it on a Tuesday according to timestamps recovered later from his own development notes, sitting at his desk at close to midnight, 3 energy drinks into a reading session that had already run 4 hours longer than he'd planned. He wasn't looking for anything unusual that night. He was simply working through Solvex's codebase the way he'd worked through a dozen others, line by line, function by function, the tedious, unglamorous part of the process that almost nobody else bothers to finish. And then he stopped scrolling, read one function twice, read it a third time out loud this time, to make sure he wasn't imagining what it seemed to say. His notes from that night, later recovered, contain a single line that investigators would find almost unbearably plain, given what it led to. "This can't be right. Check again tomorrow when I'm not tired." He checked again the next day. It was right. Here's the mechanism, and it's worth slowing down for, because "he exploited a flaw" is a sentence that means almost nothing on its own. Solvex Finance, like most lending protocols of its kind, allows users to borrow against collateral, and it prices that collateral using something called an oracle, a piece of software that checks the current market price of an asset before deciding how much someone is allowed to borrow against it. Oracles are, in theory, hard to fool because they're supposed to pull prices from multiple trading venues at once, so no single trade can move the number. What Ethan Cole found buried in code that had been sitting untouched and unaudited for over a year was that Solvex's oracle leaned unusually heavily on a single smaller trading pool for one specific, lower volume asset, a shortcut some earlier developer had taken to save on computing costs and never revisited. If someone could move the price in that one smaller pool, even briefly, Solvex's oracle would believe it and lend against a price that existed nowhere else in the market. The tool that made this possible is called a flash loan, and it is, on its own, a completely legal and increasingly common piece of decentralized finance. Traders use it legitimately thousands of times a day. A flash loan lets you borrow an enormous sum of cryptocurrency with zero collateral on the condition that you pay it back with a small fee within the same single transaction. If you don't pay it back by the end of that transaction, the entire transaction simply never happened. The blockchain reverses it as if it never occurred. It exists to let traders exploit tiny, real price differences between exchanges for a profit measured in fractions of a percent. Ethan Cole read that same tool and saw something else in it entirely. A way to briefly become, for 11 seconds, one of the wealthiest entities in the world of decentralized finance, with money that was never really his, in order to move a price that would never move on its own. What makes this specific kind of exploit so difficult to defend against, and so different from a conventional bank robbery, is that at no point does the attacker actually need real capital of their own. A traditional swindler needs at least some seed money, some initial capital to make a scheme look credible. A flash loan removes that requirement entirely. For the length of a single transaction, the size of the attacker's own bank account becomes completely irrelevant, because the loan and the repayment exist inside the same breath of computation, verified and reversed by the blockchain itself faster than any human institution could ever intervene. Solvex's engineers, in the post-incident review they eventually published, would describe this as the exploit's defining cruelty. Nothing about their system technically malfunctioned. Every individual piece of code did exactly what it was written to do. The failure wasn't a broken lock. It was a door built correctly for a threat model nobody had bothered to imagine. He tested a version of it, at far smaller scale, twice. The first test ran entirely on a private copy of the protocol he'd built himself on his own machine, a kind of shadow Solvex with no real money in it at all, where he could fail as many times as he needed to without anyone else ever seeing a single attempt. He failed there 9 times over 4 nights before the timing held. 9 small, invisible collapses that cost him nothing but sleep, each one teaching him by exactly how many milliseconds his sequence was too slow or too early. The second test was the one that should have gotten him caught if anyone had been looking closely enough. A live transaction using real money against a real but tiny trading pool holding only a few $1,000s, run at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, specifically because he'd learned from watching Solvex's activity logs for weeks that almost nobody was awake to notice anything at that hour. it worked. It also cost him a few $100s in fees for a result that made him, briefly, $20 richer. A number so small that nobody watching Solvex's protocol that week had any reason to look at it and imagine what it was actually rehearsing for. March 3rd, 2:14 a.m. The real transaction goes out. In roughly 4 seconds, the flash loan of borrowed capital lands. In the next 2, it moves through the thin trading pool, pushing the price of one obscure asset to a level it had never reached and would never reach again. In the next 3 seconds, Solvex's own lending contract, reading that inflated price exactly as it was designed to, releases a loan against it. An amount worth $180 million, more than 30 times what any legitimate account should have been able to borrow against real collateral. In the final 2 seconds, the original flash loan is repaid in full. The artificial price collapses back to normal the instant the manipulation ends and the transaction closes. 11 seconds start to finish. On the blockchain's public ledger, visible to anyone who knew to look, it appears as a single, oddly large, technically valid transaction. No laws of the software broken, nothing a computer would flag as impossible. Just numbers moving exactly the way the code allowed them to. So, ask the question that would occupy exactly nobody at Solvex Finance for the first 90 seconds, and every single person there for the rest of that year. How do you call something theft when nothing about the code was broken to make it happen? The protocol's own security team, a rotating group of 6 engineers, most of them also anonymous, most of them scattered across 4 countries and coordinating entirely through an encrypted chat channel, noticed the transaction within 4 minutes. Not because any alarm triggered automatically, but because one of them happened to be awake, watching the protocol's dashboard out of habit before bed, and saw the reserve balance drop to nearly 0 in a single line item. He didn't understand at first what he was looking at. His initial assumption, typed into the channel before he'd fully processed the number, was that the dashboard itself had broken. A display bug, a bad data feed, something that would resolve itself in a refresh. He refreshed it twice. The number held. His message into the team's private channel, preserved later in logs handed to investigators, read simply, "Is this real? Tell me this isn't real." Within 90 seconds, 2 more engineers were awake and typing, pulling the transaction hash, watching the same 11-second sequence replay itself on a block explorer. Each of them independently arriving at the same conclusion the first one had already reached alone in the dark. It was real. That's agency number 1, in a sense. The protocol's own defenders, the people who had built and maintained this exact system, watching it fail in a way none of their internal reviews had ever modeled, in real time, unable to do anything but watch the balance keep falling for the 11 seconds it took, and then sit with the fact that it was already over. Within the hour, Solvex's team brought in an outside blockchain forensics firm, the kind increasingly hired within minutes of an incident like this one, specialists whose entire job is tracing cryptocurrency across the public ledger fast enough to catch it before it scatters. Their initial report to federal investigators, portions of which have since become public through court filings, contained one line that reportedly made the room go quiet. The stolen funds hadn't moved to a single wallet at all. Within minutes of the theft completing, the $180 million had already begun splitting itself, automatically, across 11 separate wallets, using a script Ethan Cole had pre-written and queued to fire the instant the funds landed. Meaning the getaway wasn't something he did after the theft. It was part of the theft, timed to the same second. That's the second name on the board. The forensics firm built specifically to catch this kind of movement, watching the money outrun their own tracing tools in the first 60 seconds they had it. Over the following 72 hours, 3 of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges in the world received internal flags on wallets tied to portions of the stolen funds attempting to convert into other currencies. And all 3, working from a shared industry blacklist updated within hours of the incident, froze the relevant accounts before a single dollar could be withdrawn as cash. At one of those exchanges, a compliance analyst working the night shift later described watching the flagged wallet attempt 3 separate withdrawal requests within the span of 2 minutes, each one bouncing off the freeze, before the activity simply stopped. The closest thing to a real-time confrontation anyone at any institution would have with the theft in progress. That's the 3rd and 4th names on the board, 2 exchanges that did exactly what they were supposed to do, fast enough that, In almost any other case, it would have ended the story right there. It didn't matter here because Ethan Cole had never planned to cash out through an exchange in the first place. The withdrawal attempts the compliance analyst watched bounce off the freeze weren't a failed getaway. They were bait. 3 small test wallets sent out deliberately to see how quickly the freeze net would close and from which direction. By the time those freezes went into effect, the bulk of the actual $180 million had already moved twice more through a decentralized exchange that requires no identification at all and into a privacy-focused blockchain that forensics firms even now cannot fully trace. 4 institutions, 4 attempts to stop the money, 4 failures, at least in the first 72 hours. A scoreboard that would have made this simply a very large, very clean theft, if what happened next hadn't happened at all. 6 days after the theft, an anonymous message appeared on Solvex Finance's own public governance forum, posted from a wallet address tied directly to the stolen funds. It didn't ask for a ransom. It offered a trade. Ethan Cole, though no one yet knew that name, would return $170 million of the $180 million taken, keeping the remaining $10 million as what he called in the message, a fair bounty for finding what your own audits missed, on the condition that Solvex's team publicly agree not to pursue prosecution and formally credit the vulnerability report. It is, almost word for word, the exact language the industry already uses for legitimate bug bounties, just applied after the fact, to a theft rather than a warning. None of that erases what this cost real people. A woman in Ohio, call her Marisol Vega for this file, 41 years old, a hospital administrator who had moved roughly $60,000 of retirement savings into Solvex over 18 months, specifically because the protocol advertised itself, in its own marketing, as audited and secure, opened the app on her phone on the morning of March 3rd the way she did most mornings, coffee in one hand, standing at her kitchen counter before her shift. The balance read 0. Not a low number, not an error message. 0 exactly, as though the 18 months of careful, unglamorous saving had simply never existed. She called the protocol's support line, which for a decentralized platform like this one meant a community chat channel staffed by volunteers, none of whom could tell her anything more than, "We're aware of an incident for the first 6 hours." She went to work that day anyway because the hospital doesn't run itself, and she has described, in a statement later given to a reporter covering the case, checking her phone in a supply closet between patients, watching the same 0 for 11 straight days. She got her funds back eventually once Solvex's insurance reserve covered the shortfall, while negotiations with Ethan Cole dragged on behind the scenes she knew nothing about. Not everyone with money in that pool that night was made whole as quickly, and several smaller depositors are still, as of this recording, waiting on partial reimbursement through a claims process Solvex set up under pressure from its own community. Solvex's team spent those 4 days split almost exactly down the middle, according to chat logs later summarized in court filings. Half the team argued the offer should be refused outright on principle, that negotiating with a thief, however politely worded his message was, would tell every future attacker that theft plus a generous-sounding return policy equals a clean exit. The other half argued something closer to triage, that a protracted legal fight might take years and might never recover a dollar of it, while accepting the trade now guaranteed $170 million back to real depositors like Marisol Vega within days, rather than an uncertain future. One team member, in a message preserved in those same logs, put it bluntly: "We didn't build this thing to win an argument about principle. We built it to give people their money back." That argument won narrowly on the 4th day. The team member, who later called it the worst week of my professional life, was on the side that lost the vote. $170 million came back, transaction by transaction, over the following week. $10 million did not. Federal investigators who had been building a case in parallel the entire time have not closed their file. A returned bug bounty negotiated after the fact does not erase the theft that preceded it under the law, whatever informal peace Solvex's team may have made with the person who took their money. As of this recording, no charges have been publicly filed, and Ethan Cole's real identity, confirmed independently by the forensics firm through wallet analysis and a small, early transaction that inadvertently touched an exchange account under his own name months before the heist, has not been made public by investigators. The wider decentralized finance community, watching this unfold in public in real time across forums and social media, split roughly the same way Solvex's own internal team had. A visible portion treated Ethan Cole, once his methods, though not yet his name, became public through Solvex's own technical postmortem, as something close to a folk hero. Proof that the industry's obsession with audited and secure marketing labels was mostly theater, and that someone patient enough to actually read the code would always find what paid auditors, working faster and more superficially, had missed. Another portion pointed just as loudly to Marisol Vega and the dozens of depositors like her, arguing that no amount of clever code justified 11 days of a hospital administrator not knowing whether her retirement savings still existed. Both arguments were being made, often in the same comment thread, often by people who agreed with each other about almost everything else in the industry. And that's really the uncomfortable center of this whole case. Ethan Cole found something real, a flaw sitting in code that a protocol holding other people's retirement savings had genuinely failed to catch. The exact kind of failure the bug bounty system exists to reward when reported honestly and in advance. He is not simply a hero exposing bad security, whatever his own message to Solvex's forum implied about finding what your own audits missed. A phrase that reads very differently once you know it was typed by someone already sitting on $180 million that belonged to strangers. He took $180 million of money that was never his to move, cost a hospital administrator 11 sleepless days over her own retirement, and kept $10 million of it for himself under a label he invented after the fact rather than one anyone agreed to beforehand. Both of those things are true at once, and this file doesn't resolve them for you. This case made it to the channel. Not everyone does. Some files never leave the vault. The ones still under active investigation, the ones where a name can't be printed yet without compromising a federal case. If you want those, the link's in the description. So, who actually deserves more blame here? The 22-year-old who found a real flaw and took a fortune that was never his to take? Or the protocol that told a hospital administrator her retirement savings were audited and secure when they were sitting behind a shortcut nobody had checked in over a year? Leave your answer below. Half of you are already about to disagree with the other half. Because the uncomfortable truth of this case isn't really about one dropout in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. It's that the same open-source code Ethan Cole spent 4 months reading alone is still sitting there, public, unaudited in places nobody's looked closely enough yet, waiting for the next person patient enough to actually read it. And if you want to see the case where the flaw wasn't in the code at all, but in a single human being trusted to review it, that story is waiting right here.